All that I know about my life, it seems I have learned in books. Each book, a different story, and each story, a lesson. These lessons were not chosen by myself. Rather, it was I who was selected by fate and her cruel curriculum. In my years, I have experienced firsthand the duality of man and the lessons they carry. Truth and deceit. Good, evil, sanity, and madness. Each lesson I overcame with relative ease, taking its knowledge with me, ready to apply its teachings in an attempt to see the whole picture, yet, no matter what I have learned, there has always been one lesson I have failed to conquer. Life and death. After all these years, I just... I'm sorry.
Such a tragic tale.
Or perhaps a befitting end.
Befitting end!
That won't be necessary.
Right.
A letter. For you.
But there's no... For the past 20 years, I've harbored a secret.
People talk about my sons and the evil things they did. Yet still I remain strangely mute. I do not discuss my own actions that day, or the rage I felt when I burned the 2 linking books that had snared them. Some people believe my sons died in those fires, but the truth is, they did not. You're the only one I can confide in, my friend. So I'm asking you to come to Tamara. There are things I must tell you about my sons.
They're alive? After all these years? They're alive? Ah! All these years!
Hello, and welcome everyone to the 5th installment of our Myst Explained series. As always, if you have not watched the previous episodes, we encourage you to go back and watch them first, as this game is a finale of sorts. Just like before, this is a lore video, so expect spoilers. You've been warned. Also, since this game was created by a third party, be prepared for retroactive continuity, as things that we came to understand in the past have now been changed. Of course, we will talk about that when the time comes.
What? That's absurd!
Myst 4 Revelation was released on September 28, 2004, and much like Myst 3 Exile, was not developed by the original team at Cyan. Over the years, publishing rights had been transferred from Broderbund to Mattel, and then finally to Ubisoft. Development for Myst 4 actually started while Mattel still owned the rights to the series. During that time, development was contracted out to Dreamforge Entertainment, who may be best known for their 1998's point-and-click psychological horror game, Sanitarium. After 2 years of development, which saw the game nearly 20% complete under Dreamforge, Ubisoft acquired the rights to the series and completely canceled the project to start it over from scratch. According to Revelations producer Genevieve Lord, the plot that takes place in Myst 4 was intended to be the plot of Myst 3. However, due to a limited time frame and the fact that Dreamforge was still forming the plot details of their game, the plot was dropped. Presto Studio was then brought in to develop Myst 3 Exile. The drop story was redeveloped once Ubisoft acquired the rights to the series. Although Ubisoft was given creative freedom in developing new ideas, Cyan did set down some ground rules for Ubisoft to follow. These rules were to make sure that what was created would keep it in the spirit of Myst lore already made. Ubisoft's development of Revelation took over 3 years and more than 80 employees to make what we will experience today. So with that, let's jump in. Once again in this game, we play as the Stranger. Atris has contacted us with world-shattering news. After all of these years, we learn that his sons, Cirrus and Aganar, were not killed when he destroyed their prison books on the island of Myst. Being that we have been through so much together, Atris feels that we are the only one that he can trust with this news, and requests that we come to Tamana, as there is much more he must tell us. Of course, we know that Tamana is not a written age, like those we have visited in the past. It's on Earth, located very close to the cleft where Atris grew up with his grandmother, Anna. We caught a fairly brief glimpse of Tamana in the previous game, and no doubt Atris has made many improvements since then, which we will see later. With a flash of light, we are thrown into the tram system that was built to provide passage to Atris' secluded home. On this ride, we're accompanied by a young girl. This is Yisha. You may recall her from the past when we saw her as just a tiny baby. Now, she's 9 years old and is our pilot to Tamana. After a few twists and turns, as well as a very beautiful view of the compound, we come to meet our old friend Atris. Although he greets us with a friendly tone, we can tell that there's something weighing heavily on his mind. Without wasting further time, he gets right to the point.
You're probably wondering why I asked you. The truth is, I need your help. As you know, my sons, Cirrus and Aganar, were trapped 20 years ago after they destroyed many of the ages I'd written. At the time, Catherine and I decided to leave them imprisoned because we'd hoped it might reform them. And now Catherine believes our sons should be released. But I need an objective opinion. I must find out if either Cirrus or Aganar deserve to be freed, and you're the only one we can trust.
Before we can go on, like always, we need to take a huge step back to understand a concept that has changed between games. If we look back to the final events on Myst, we remember that Atris left 2 scorch marks where once had been the 2 trap books that held his sons. Originally, at least in what we understood from the Book of Atris, Myst, and Riven, these trap books were linking books that had been altered to serve their purpose. It was first alluded to that removing 1 or more pages would sever the link, thus giving us a reason to visit the other ages found on Myst. However, as the games continued and the plot and gameplay became more complex, page hunting would have become monotonous and boring, thus leading to the understanding of trap books to be altered. Looking into the original lore, we learn that trap books were originally devised by the Dunny. The method of creating such books involved altering key lines of text in the original linking book. The change doesn't alter the link itself, but instead severs its connection. Being that the alteration is so subtle, those who do not know what to look for would be completely unaware of the book's purpose. All other aspects of the trap book would be normal, just like a regular linking book. However, once the victim places their hand on the panel, they would be deposited and permanently trapped in a dark void. In the case that someone else were to come along and use that same book, they would switch places, freeing the former prisoner at the cost of then trapping themselves. After Riven, Cyan Worlds dismissed the understanding of trap books, saying that the art did not have the power to write them. Instead, it was revealed that the trap books seen and used previously are just prison books, an age with no return linking book, essentially. The trap books used in Myst and Riven were used as a device to work alongside gameplay as an endgame scenario. Of course, fans were not really accepting of this retcon and instead issued a few theories that would keep the timeline and games in balance. One such theory embraces the void world that both brothers were trapped in during Myst, but sees Atris altering the trap phrases to then deposit them in their respective ages. Another theory is that the act of burning the linking books destroyed the text that made the trap, and therefore forced Cirrus and Agnar into Spire and Haven accordingly. Personally, I think that Atris would have fixed the links prior to destroying the books, but I am interested to hear if there are any other theories out there. Now that we know the reason that we're here, Atris wastes no time. In his lab, he has a crystal viewer, much like the one that we used on Rhyme after the events on Myst. This one, however, has been improved to have a sound component to it. This addition would allow the operator to listen in on any viewed age, which would be helpful when observing any unsuspecting occupants. After a brief calibration, the device is ready to use. As Atris begins to explain the next steps, multiple explosions erupt around the lab, knocking out the power and damaging the image modulator on the viewer in the process. Although the crystal viewer itself is undamaged, it requires the image modulator to function at its full capacity. With a quick run of damage control, Atris decides to link to Rhyme for spare parts so he can fix the machine. While he is away, he asks us to restore power to the compound, and once we get that back up, to then contact him using the crystal viewer.
Keep an eye on Yisha, will you? I'll be back.
Leaving the lab, we descend down to the main floor of the compound. This level of Tamana contains the main living quarters, which includes the bedrooms, kitchen, and Catherine's study, as well as a few greenhouses. With a little bit of work, we complete the task of getting Tamana's power back up and running. But just as we start to make our way back to the lab, something happens. Suddenly, with no warning, the ground starts to shake as an ear-shattering screech and a bright green flash of light erupt from below. The path we're on breaks apart as the rock below us crumbles. We begin to fall, and the world goes black as we are knocked out. Of course, this wouldn't be a good lore explanation if we didn't talk about what happened prior to this point in time. After the events of Myst 3, Catherine and Atris took the time to settle down to raise Yisha and live a somewhat normal life. While Atris and Catherine are watching Yisha grow, Cirrus and Agnar are not far from their thoughts. Atris made it a point to make frequent trips to Rhyme so that he could look into Haven and Spire using the crystal viewer. Although they are imprisoned, he continues to monitor their safety and well-being, both for him and Catherine's peace of mind. On one such journey, Atris begins to consider how he could improve the crystal viewer's design to achieve a better image. Knowing that Catherine would be crushed if this plan didn't come to fruition, Atris keeps her in the dark, and keeps his plans and ideas to himself as he makes more and more frequent trips to Rhyme. If we remember back to our short visit after the events on Myst, Rhyme is a very cold place. The chilling temperatures allow the crystal viewer that was built here to work properly. While Atris was working on his planned improvements to the machine, he began to find it harder and harder to work in such conditions. Not to be dismayed, he turns his focus to finding a way to simulate these extreme temperatures inside the viewer itself, thus allowing it to be installed in Tamana. After many experiments that span a few months, a breakthrough was made, and Atris enlists help from the Guild of Machinists to help build the new viewer in his lab on Tamana. Of course, Catherine was happy with this new viewer being installed. However, deep down she was still sad that they were not able to visit their sons in person. Linking to either age without knowing how Cirrus and Agnar would react would be disastrous. Catherine understood those risks, so for the time being, this plan would suffice. After its installation and a bit more tweaking, the new crystal viewer was operational. With its redesign, Atris was able to get clearer images of any age he viewed. Even though this is a huge breakthrough, Atris wasn't fully satisfied and believed further improvements could be made. A few weeks later, and after a visit to Relishon, Atris laid out plans for a few more modifications. These changes would give the viewer its ability to listen to the age being viewed. However, neither parent was ready for what they would hear once the modification was complete. Specifically, when listening to Haven. Having visited both prison ages prior to setting the traps, Atris assured her of their son's safety. This information, however, did little to soothe her heart. Not too long after the new viewer had been installed, Catherine came up with the idea of altering both Haven and Spire using the art to insert a secure room into each age. These containment chambers would provide separation between both parties and provide a secure way to store a return linking book so visitors could come and go as they pleased. The chambers would be comprised of a metallic greenish-black stone known as Nara, 30 times the density of steel. Atris agreed with his wife's idea and wrote the needed lines to achieve this prospect. In addition, he enlisted the help of the Guild of Stonemasons to construct a similar-looking chamber for both linking books in Tamana, thus providing an extra layer of security at home. It took a bit of time, but once completed, Atris and Catherine would start to visit both brothers frequently. However, not knowing how either of them would react, Atris was the first to make each journey. Once he was satisfied with the security of the written-in containment chambers, he allowed Catherine and eventually Yisha to visit as well. After multiple visits, Atris was still not convinced that either son had learned a lesson from their imprisonment. For the time, it was decided to leave them incarcerated. Catherine did not take well to this and was torn on the matter. She writes about it in her journal.
I do not excuse the crimes committed. Cirrus and Achenar shattered so many lives in far worse ways than Anna's death shattered ours. It's for this reason that I have stood by Atris's decision and left my sons imprisoned all these years. But I cannot escape my own culpability in this. For when Cirrus and Achenar needed me most, I was too consumed by sorrow to see. I am being torn in two. I am trapped between a mother's love for her children and a woman's loyalty to her husband.
While all of these events revolve around Cirrus and Achenar, we cannot forget to ask, but what of Yisha? Although busy with the events described prior, both Atris and Catherine set apart time to teach Yisha on the Dunny, their history, and their culture. It was eventually decided to also teach her the art. Having never taught Cirrus and Achenar, Yisha would be the first in their lineage to carry on this ancient science. While we were first exploring Tamana working to restore power, Yisha called us to one of the greenhouses on the main level. When we entered the structure, she quickly motioned for us to be quiet, pointing to a small green lizard. It doesn't take long for the lizard to grow tired of being watched and soon runs off. Yisha isn't too bothered though. She remarks that it'll be back because this is its favorite spot to sleep. She knows this because the necklace she wears has shown her. In fact, this necklace has shown her many things. The necklace she wears, or what we will call it going forward, her memory amulet, was created on the age of Serenia. Serenia was one of the few ages written by Catherine and is an age of natural beauty. It is made up of several large islands surrounded by ocean. Unlike the other ages we come to visit in this game, Serenia is inhabited by a very peaceful matriarchal society. Atris and Catherine first came to Serenia with Cirrus and Achenar when the boys were around 10 years of age. While there, they learned about the various traditions and customs which made Serenia unique. Notably, an order of 6 women that can be found on the Temple Island that we meet later. These women, or protectors as they are called, perform rituals to preserve the memories of the dead. Being ever curious, Atris had a look through Catherine's descriptive book. He found that the flower the protectors use as a memory chamber is actually the fruiting body of a massive fungus. The root system of the fungus produces nodules of nutrients, recycled from dead organic material. This all being part of the fungus's reproductive cycle, which apparently lasts quite a long time. The plant itself produces very strong fragrances in its inner chamber, and as the plant approaches maturity, the fumes become highly toxic, making it impossible to survive inside. This requires the Serenians to move to another plant once one has expired. The natives of Serenia claim that the nutrient modules have the power to store the memories of their dead. They harvest these nodules, which are referred to as memory globes, and store them within the inner chamber. This task is very delicate, and the protectors have dedicated themselves to this task as well as to the care of the plant itself. Looking deeper into the process, the memory chamber's ability to store these memories depends entirely on the root system being in contact with a life stone. This stone is a rare mineral of unknown properties found in the southern hills of Serenia. If contact with the life stone is broken, the plant gradually loses its ability to store memories and will eventually die. Not too long before we arrive in Timana, Yisha was brought to Serenia by Atris and Catherine. Much like her brothers before her, she learned about their history, culture, and their connection to Dream. According to the Protectors, the Dream World is a mirror realm of the physical manifestation of Serenia. It is here where the Serenian ancestors reside and provide guidance and information on future events to those who seek it. Upon learning about it, Yisha was very excited to learn more about Dream, and although Atris was skeptical of the entire thing, he let her proceed with training. Even though the experience of Dream is not physical, it is still very dangerous to enter Dream without the assistance of a spirit guide. These guides serve two purposes. The first is to aid in finding what the dreamer seeks, be that knowledge or guidance, and the second is to serve as an anchor, to prevent your memories from becoming lost and crushed amid Dream's constant shifting waves of possibility. After completing 3 months of training provided by the Protectors, a ceremony honoring her graduation was held. It is here that Yisha received her necklace, marking her mastery of the Serenian customs. In the coming days, after she returned to Timana to continue her education, Atris and Catherine began to take note that Yisha was displaying an uncanny knowledge of events that she was never witness to. Of course, neither parent understood the power that was held within the amulet that she was given. Perhaps they came to understand at some point, but for now, it remained a mystery as to how their daughter knew so much of the events that she spoke of. We will see Serenia later in the game, but for now, let's get back to the present. Pulling ourselves out of the darkness, we awake to find that night has fallen on Timana. The compound is calm with no sign of who or what caused the cave-in that brought us to this point. A quick look around shows us that Atris hasn't returned either. We are left lost and confused. What happened? Who did this? And more importantly, where's Yisha? Making our way back to the lab, we learn that Atris is actually stuck on Rhyme due to a terrible electromagnetic storm. He is unable to hear anything we may have to say and cannot leave Rhyme until the storm subsides. In the meantime, Atris gives us a pathway forward and instructs us to find his journals for Haven and Spire. And while looking around, we come across a very important clue, one that confirms our worst fears. On the floor of the master bedroom sits Yisha's necklace, something she would never just leave behind if it was not for some extreme situation. Touching it, we are immediately hit with a white light, being taken into a memory tied to an event at this location. We see a frightened Yisha running from an unknown pursuer, managing to close shut a hidden door at the last moment, just before the assailant is able to grab her. No doubt that this event occurred only moments after we blacked out. Knowing that this item is invaluable in gaining more information, we take it with us on our journey. More and more questions begin to mount as we continue to look around, eventually coming to a break in the case when we find the linking chamber mentioned earlier. What was meant as a final means of security now sits in ruin, broken by some unknown force. What we do know for sure is that the brothers are behind this in some way, and it's up to us to find the pieces and put them together. Before Cirrus and Agonar became imprisoned in Spire and Haven, they were in the middle of enacting a devious plan against their father. Of course, we did not know the full details until now, but thanks to a journal we find, we're given a taste as to what was being planned. As before, it was Cirrus who had started all of this. The plan was to take place on Serenia. At the time, one of the flowers used as a memory chamber had begun to wither. To continue with their tasks, the Protectors abandoned it for a younger flower growing nearby. Using some breathing kits taken from Mechanical Age, the brothers were able to safely work inside the old flower and seal the toxic center chamber, allowing them to work with clean air inside. Cirrus had a theory that while most memories were extracted after a person had died, the process could be adapted to pull those same memories while the subject was still alive. The abandoned memory chamber would be a perfect place for these experiments, as the protectors no longer tended to it. Once established inside, they began building the essential machines to test Sirius's theory. The construction of these machines went well enough with little fighting, although Sirius was quite impatient through much of the process. While Achenar had his doubts, Sirius's genius shined when they eventually got to live tests, with the first test results showing that the process was not only feasible, but more than what either could have imagined. Even though this test was successful, the test subject was left to suffer, bad enough that even Achenar himself showed sympathy. Many more tests were done, but these set Achenar on edge, as the more tests that Sirius did, the higher the risk of alerting the protectors to their presence. Because in order to make this process work, Sirius had to go into Dream, for which he had no spirit guide. This use of Dream was very dangerous, not just for the safety of Sirius, but for the potential of being detected by another person traversing the realm. Eventually, tensions became too high, and Achenar mentions the option of stealing the Life Stone as a backup if they had to cut and run. Sirius immediately blew up in anger and berated him for his insatiable desire for instant gratification, following up with blaming him for the whole Narayan civil war. Achenar saw this as Sirius showing his true intentions, to use this machine not only on their father, but to then backstab Achenar as well. While the timeline isn't very clear, we can put the pieces together between Achenar's Serenia journal and those we find on Haven. Before their fight, they set the first part of the plan into motion, sending Catherine to Riven, with Atris falling for the bait and becoming trapped in Kavir. Afterwards, a truce was made, and the brothers agreed to meet back on Serenia after they had had some time to take advantage of their newly acquired freedom. Achenar writes about this truce in his journal we find on Haven. According to him, Sirius tricked him with this truce, and while Achenar was still building machines for their plan, Sirius snuck off to Spire to plunder its treasure. Of course, this is just speculation from Achenar. We will talk about him in a bit, but first, let's talk about the mastermind of the original plan and see if his imprisonment had taught him anything. Atris wrote Spire with a specific idea in mind. A soaring rock and crystal spire rising out of the dense clouds like the watchtower of some gem-studded castle. Needless to say, he achieved that goal perfectly. But Spire was more complex than what Atris could have ever imagined. Although he spent some time in the Age to make sure that it was habitable for whoever found it as their prison, he was not able to learn about the materials that make up the Age. Specifically the crystals found throughout the main area, or palace as it's referred to by Sirius. Spire is home to 3 different types of crystals, 2 of which have unique properties, but for now, we will only be focusing specifically on the white crystals. These are unique in the way that their inner matrix allows them to conduct and collect an abundance of negative electric charges. When charged, they provide light, and when they come into contact with a grounded source, the energy is released, producing a harmonic hum. If you remember back to Myst, Sirius was the brother who first started to stray from good to evil, bringing his brother Achenar along for the ride. Together, the two pillaged and plundered various ages written by Atris, destroying many of the books held in the library on the island of Myst. His greed and lust for power led him to Spire, his very own prison among the stars. Despite the picturesque views of Spire, Sirius remained blinded by anger. He had always resented Atris, seeing his father as an obstacle holding him back, and swearing revenge for his imprisonment. While some would think that this time locked away would give him time to reflect, it instead gave him time to experiment and plan. Although freedom was nothing more than a dream, Sirius made sure that he would be ready if and when the time came. I doubt anyone would have predicted what was to come from the fateful mistake that Atris made, writing in the containment chambers. Seeing that the possibility of escape lay behind a so-called indestructible barrier, Sirius sought to prove the description wrong and show his father how superior he truly was. In addition to escape, he would also finish what he had started so many years ago. Sirius facilitated his escape by using the lessons taught to him by the very person who refused to set him free. Knowing the structure was impervious to conventional methods, he instead focused on the built-in weakness of all material. This wouldn't be a full frontal assault, no, instead it would be an attack on a molecular scale. Sirius knew that with the right frequency, he could disrupt the molecules enough to make them crumble into dust. Not long after he started, Sirius soon realized that, like before, he needed someone to help him. Being imprisoned, Akinar was out of the question, and his parents, ever suspicious, he instead turned his focus to Yisha, a young mind Sirius knew could easily be formed and manipulated to his desire. He started by befriending her, acting innocent and kind during their meetings. In their conversations, Sirius learned that Yisha had become quite taken with the culture on Serenia. Seeing an easy win, he carved a spirit guide from what Yisha had described in their talks. She writes in her journal that,
I got the best gift of all time today, a spirit guide statue. Sirius carved it for me himself. It looks kind of funny, but it's 'cause he never saw one. He just went with what I told him. He knows exactly what questions to ask, and he listens better than anyone.
With this, Sirius had won over Yisha's young mind. Using his influence, he convinced Yisha to have Atris make him a chess set. Of course, this was no ordinary chess set. This one had pieces made from Nara. Finally, Sirius had his sample and proceeded with frequency tests that would allow him to shatter Nara for his escape. The final entry in the journal we find still sends chills down my spine. I have found the frequency, is all it says. His journal gives us all we need to know, and that he has not changed. Hate and revenge are still in the forefront of his actions and thoughts. The time he had spent in Spire did little to reform him. Knowing this about Sirius, let's pause and take a look at his brother on Haven. Much like Spire, Atris wrote Haven with an image in his mind. This image goes back not only to Stoneship and the events that happened there, but to lessons taught by his grandmother Anna in the journal we find pertaining to the creation of Haven. We read this quote.
Never be discouraged by a mistake, Atris. My grandmother, Anna, always used to say. Strive to learn from it instead, and you will achieve great things.
While Anna's quote was originally meant to help Atris grow in his understanding, it directly relates to Atris's time on Stoneship with Emmett, Will, and Branch. In the Stoneship journal we found on Myst, we learn that Atris attempted an experiment with the art. He attempted to create a boat by writing it into the descriptive book. Although he thought he planned it all out correctly, the boat did not appear as intended. Instead, it merged with the rocks that made the area where Atris would link to, breaking the ship in half. What Atris was left with is what we see today when we link to Stoneship. This failure drove the main feature of Haven. The large wooden ship standing upright on the shore was exactly as Atris had imagined it. He wanted it in a way to draw in unsuspecting ne'er-do-wells as a promise of intrigue and adventure. And needless to say, that trap worked as intended, with Agonar taking the bait not soon after his brother falling for Spire. Agonar shared his brother's resentment for their father. I suspect, though, it was more from Sirius's manipulation rather than personal resentment. When we first met Agonar, he was trapped in the Blue Book on the island of Myst. His mentality was manic, almost incoherent in the short glimpses we could see through the static. Now, as we read through his journal found on Haven, we see a different person entirely. Agonar has become composed and level-headed in his words. Between hunting for treasure and exploring the depths of the jungle, Agonar was perfectly content. However, with time, reality soon set in. Agonar began to wonder why Sirius hadn't come looking for him yet. As mentioned before, they were supposed to meet back on Serenia after their truce, but clearly Agonar had no intentions to do so. The realization soon came that there was no return linking book to be found, and with this realization, we see a quick change in Agonar's disposition. In an instant, he turned back to his primitive nature, foregoing full sentences in favor of short bursts of thought. Not only that, but we witness his anger return in full force. With the reality setting in that he would be here for the foreseeable future, Agonar turned to his primitive survivalist instinct. One small entry in his journal shows us how much he had come to rely on his brother in times of crisis.
I have to pull myself together, come up with a plan. That's what Cirrus would do, wouldn't it? Isn't it? Where the hell is Cirrus?
Relying on his intuition, Achenar set up a temporary shelter in the upright wooden ship. Being the hunter that he is, food was easy to come by. He soon became the apex predator of Haven, even killing a behemoth from the sea that dared challenge him. As time went on, Achenar decided to move more and more inland and set up a permanent structure deep in the forest, surrounded by a freshwater lake. He remarked that living lakeside has its perks. Its location is calmer, with not as much wind as there was on the shore, but it did rain just as hard. Regardless of that, the only real difference he was concerned about were the screams he could hear from the jungle. I don't know if this was madness setting in like Savedro from Myst 3, or if it was just the jungle noises starting to get to him. Either way, it leads to a moment of reflection. The screams that he hears started to affect his sleep, and as he says,
And when I close my eyes, the things I see, the faces. My God, Cirrus, did we really kill so many?
once again, just like our interactions on Myst, Achenar is a stark contrast to his brother. His guilt continued to plague his dreams. All of those people he exploited and killed in the past came to seek vengeance. While we don't get a direct statement on it, we can deduce that Achenar is truly remorseful for his past. We see a changed man towards the end of his writings in one of the last entries we read. Achenar writes about his experience with a group of mangries. These animals share many similar features and behaviors to those of monkeys that we know here on Earth. While Achenar was spending his evenings sketching the animals in an observation post, the mangries were busy playing a game of catch with some pieces of fruit. One of those pieces happened to roll under the post, and Achenar soon came to realize that the calls the animals were making were directed towards him. They had given him a name. While at the time he didn't know what to make of this revelation, over time he did begin to form a strong bond with this group of mangries. I don't want to go too in-depth as this pertains to a critical puzzle within the game, but for now, just know that these mangries become a sort of family for Achenar. Speaking of family, let's get back to Cirrus. Driven by contempt, Cirrus used the resources of Spire to complete his plan. In the near 20 years he spent there, Cirrus had laid the foundations of science and chemistry to create his means of escape. Lucky for him, all of the needed components were contained within Spire itself. Earlier I mentioned the white crystals that are found all over Spire. These crystals and their unique properties would be the main component needed to shatter Nara. Originally, these crystals were used to produce music. As you can imagine, being alone for all that time can get pretty lonely. To combat boredom, Cirrus built a large crystal organ. This organ was controlled from a throne-like chair, which is commonly referred to as the Spider Throne. The throne itself is a set of 3 sliders that are connected to a power bank of crystals. Adjusting the sliders produce sound with various amounts of power being applied to each string. As with all instruments, there has to be a way to tune it so the sound produced is in the desired key. Thus, the throne was built to house such a tuning mechanism as well. This mechanism controls baffles connected to natural stone pipes found around Spire. Operating this mechanism tunes the notes generated by the resonance of the crystals in the main chamber as they pass through those pipes. After the containment chamber appeared, and Cirrus found the proper frequency to destroy Nara, this organ was renovated and additional security was put into place to prevent unauthorized access to Cirrus's new bomb facility. The bombs made here were not the sort of bombs we've come to know today. Where most bombs we know explode, these ones release sound at a specific frequency, shattering material and structures on a molecular level. This is where I got stuck for a very long time in this explanation. How exactly did these bombs work? Since there are no notes or journal entries on the topic, I had to do a lot of digging. The official strategy guide suggested that the crystals were coated in a plant solution that was then frozen to avoid accidental detonation. While this is an easy solution, it essentially turns these into time bombs, with the melting of the solution acting as the timer. The fact that we see these bombs used in multiple locations far from the factory requires us to look for a different answer as to how they worked. After talking it over with a few users on Reddit, shout out to Darkspine10, I was closer to a proper explanation, but something was still missing. Finally, I turned to our resident engineer and train enthusiast, Council of Trent. Here's what we came up with. We theorized that Cirrus first had to create containers to hold the charged crystal. We see these on his bedroom workbench. These containers are conductive, so they alone cannot be used to create the bombs. To isolate the charged crystal, Cirrus would have to suspend them in some sort of liquid or gel that would serve as an insulator. We find this substance in his garden from a plant native to Spire. We theorize that this plant contains a natural ester fluid, a non-toxic natural oil that has a very high dielectric strength. This means that the liquid can naturally withstand a strong electric field without breaking down and becoming conductive. The extract from this plant is naturally thick, as we see on the table found in the garden, thus suspending the charged crystal until the container is broken, allowing its contents to come in contact with a grounded source and release its energy. That theory took way too long to get to, and if you have a different theory, I would love to hear it in the comments below. Now, knowing everything that we do, we can finally talk about what happens after we blacked out at the start of the game. The exact timeline, like many other parts in this series, is not told to us directly. However, using what we see and hear from the memory amulet, we learn that the brothers reunite. Well, not right away, of course. We already know Akinar's reaction to Cirrus blowing a hole in the containment chamber on Haven. Once Cirrus broke free, he knew that he could not enact his plan alone, so he implores Akinar to help him once more. The two agree to work together. Cirrus breaks the containment chamber in Tamana and chases down Yisha while Akinar is sent to gather needed supplies. Once he has what he's needed, he will meet Cirrus on Serenia. Knowing what we do from the journals found on Haven and Spire, it seems odd that Akinar would agree to help his brother after all the remorse he felt. Of course, Cirrus didn't know about his change in attitude. When asked for help, Akinar realized that this would be the perfect opportunity to make up for his past by stopping his brother. After everything we do going through the game, we finally gain access to the abandoned memory chamber on Serenia. We find Yisha tied to a chair upstairs. She's yelling for Akinar but stops when she sees us, begging us for help to set her free. As we're about to release her, Akinar rounds the corner carrying the Life Stone and pointing a small crudely made hand crossbow at Yisha. The two argue, pleading their case and who to believe. The time has come to make a choice, one that could spell doom if we make it incorrectly. It is important that I mention that we have seen Yisha in Serenia before this point in the story. Prior to accessing the chamber where we are now, we were allowed access to Dream. In there, we came across a consciousness with no waking mind to return to. That was Yisha. Having all the pieces together, we know the original plan the brothers had prior to the events on Myst, and we know that Cirrus was going to steal his father's memory to learn the art. His whole goal was to be able to write his own ages, ones that he could exploit and rule over. He was confident that the equipment they left on Serenia lay untouched, so he took Yisha to the abandoned memory chamber to enact his plan. Using that machinery along with fresh memory orbs he harvested, Cirrus planned on learning what he needed from Yisha's current knowledge. Once done, he would then remove her consciousness, substituting his own in its place. In this new body, he would masquerade as Yisha, learning the art directly from Atris. And after learning enough to write his own ages, Cirrus would then kill both his parents and return all of his memories back to his original body. Knowing all of this, we know the choice we have to make. Pulling the correct lever begins the process to return Cirrus and Yisha's memories back to their rightful owner. However, something isn't right. Yisha's memory is not returning, and to top it all off, the memory chamber has begun to die since Aguinar removed the Life Stone. If the chamber dies during the transfer, the damage to Yisha could be catastrophic. Thinking quickly, Akinar instructs us to use the other chair in the chamber to get to Yisha, to free her memories. While we do that, he has an idea to give us more time and quickly runs back downstairs. Climbing into the other chair, we use a special tablet to enter into Dream. There we are led to Yisha and find that something has latched onto her memories, barring her from returning. This thing holding onto Yisha is Cirrus, who is using her to remain anchored in Dream to avoid being crushed by its shifting waves of possibility. Yisha is not aware of any of this because Cirrus is using shared memories to confuse her, thus hiding himself from her. In order to save Yisha, we have to correct these memories, breaking the bonds that hold the two together. This will allow Yisha to return to her body, and at the same time, cutting Cirrus loose will send him into the void of Dream, where his mind will be destroyed, killing him in the process. Once we finish the task, we are returned to our body. We find Akinar next to Yisha. His breathing is ragged, and he has trouble standing. He explains that in order to give you extra time, he had to insert the life stone directly into the sealed chamber downstairs. As mentioned before, this chamber was sealed off 20 years ago due to the toxic fumes that the plant gives off in its advanced stages of maturity. Akinar broke the glass, releasing the gases, giving him a fatal dose in the process. He knew this would be the outcome, but sees it as a proper end to both Cirrus and himself. After all he had done in the past, this sacrifice is his penance. He passes away in peace with his head on Yisha's lap.
It's okay. Cirrus is dead. It's over. Everything's gonna be okay, little sis. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay.
And there it is. Myst 4 Revelation, the final installment of the Stranger Timeline. Thank you so much for watching, and to all of the fans who provided kind words of encouragement through the process, a special thanks to all of you. I don't know yet if we will continue with Myst 5 and onward in future installments, but I do know that other projects are being worked on, some of which are years in the making. We hope to see you in the next series, and of course, until then, as always, bye-bye.